David Payne isn't a name you hear often in the McCann case, but maybe it should be. There's a loose thread in this story, a forgotten detail, an unexplained silence. In this video, we're going to pull that thread, and you might just understand why it was left out of the official narrative for so long. Imagine opening an old drawer, one that creaks. At the bottom, among yellowed papers and faded photos, a poorly folded piece of clothing catches your eye, and on it, almost imperceptible, a loose thread. A thread no one cut. It's been there for years, discreet, nearly invisible, but if pulled firmly, it might unravel the entire seam. The story you've heard about the McCann case is like that garment, carefully folded, tucked away in a comfortable corner of collective memory. The parents, the night of the disappearance, the headlines, the sniffer dogs, the suspicions, the grief, and then silence, a long, almost rehearsed pause, as if the story had been closed, even without an ending. But there's a name that didn't survive the edit, a face that vanished from the front pages, a man who was there, at the heart of the events alongside the parents, hours before Madeleine went missing, and who, for some reason, was left out of the seam. David Payne. Few people talk about him. Even fewer remember what he did that night. But there are records, statements that mention his name, averted glances when the topic resurfaces, a doctor who noticed something strange, a behavior that, at the time, raised eyebrows and then disappeared from the narrative. This isn't about accusations. It's about a question that was never answered. Why wasn't he investigated with the same rigor as the others? David Payne was the last person, besides the parents, to see Madeleine alive. That sentence exists in official documents. It's there. But had you heard it before? Had you felt its weight? Exactly. Some threads were left loose on purpose, untouched, so no one would pull them. But today, we're going to tug. You know what's most uncomfortable? It's not the absence of answers. It's the presence of silence. The feeling that some questions were stifled before they could even be asked. As if someone, at some point, decided enough was enough. That certain names shouldn't be spoken anymore. That digging too deep might destroy what was left of the carefully crafted image. But the problem is, silence speaks too. It points, it outlines, and sometimes it screams. Screams on behalf of those who can no longer. David Payne's figure isn't just a forgotten name. It's a symbol of what was swept under the rug, of everything left out of the seam, not because it was irrelevant, but because it was convenient. And that convenience came at a cost, maybe a much higher cost than we realize. Today we're going to pull that thread, slowly, but without letting go. And maybe the fabric of this story will never be the same again. If you feel there's something in this tapestry that hasn't been told, stay with me, because this loose thread still bothers, and its silence is a clue too. Have you ever noticed how some people appear in stories like shadows? They're there, present, part of the scene, but no one looks at them directly. It's like they're part of the background, the wallpaper. Not because they're irrelevant, but maybe because their presence disrupts the narrative. David Payne was a doctor, a close friend of the McCanns, and part of the group that traveled with the family to Portugal. He wasn't a bystander. He was in everything, in the photos, the meals, the statements. But curiously, as the spotlight tightened on Madeleine's disappearance, he began to fade from view. What many forget, or perhaps never knew, is that, according to Jerry McCann himself, David was the last person besides the parents to see Madeleine alive. It was late afternoon, just after 6. Jerry was heading out to play tennis. He said he asked David to stop by apartment 5A, check if everything was okay. Payne went in, stayed a few minutes, left. According to him, he saw Madeleine in pink pajamas, chatting with her mother. He smiled, said everything seemed calm, and then nothing. That account, which should have been a cornerstone in the investigation's timeline, was treated as a footnote. Payne gave a statement, of course, but he was never deeply questioned, never became a focus. While the McCanns faced interrogations from the Portuguese police and judgment from the British press, Payne slipped out of the narrative as if he'd played his part and exited the stage. But what happens when a key piece of the plot leaves too soon? When a central character becomes just a hazy memory in the public's version of the story? That's where the first poorly sewn fold in this tapestry lies, and it starts to pull. What's most curious is that Payne's disappearance from the narrative wasn't just a distraction. The media chased the trail that felt more dramatic. The parents, the grief, the guilt, the doubt, everything that fueled headlines, clicks, emotional reactions. And Payne, silence by absence. edited out with elegance. But some people didn't forget. A doctor, for instance, a family friend present that week, said she saw Payne acting strangely. She noted his behavior with the children made her uncomfortable. That testimony exists. It's documented, and it was ignored. Why? Maybe because David was a doctor, respected, with a calm demeanor. Maybe because the truth was more inconvenient than the silence. Or maybe because pulling that thread would risk the entire narrative, the one the world was ready to believe. His silence became part of the tapestry, and the silence of others became the stitching. It wasn't just the police who let it slide. The public did too. The narrative was shaped by what was easiest to accept. The group of friends, the top of 7, stayed in the McCann's shadow, shielded by an unspoken pact. They said what was needed, repeated aligned versions, and those who strayed were sidelined. And Payne? He drifted away gradually, didn't appear at press conferences, gave no interviews. His presence evaporated like steam on a cold mirror. Still there, but blurred enough that no one wanted to wipe it clean. It's in this void that the discomfort lives. His name, absent from headlines, echoes in the story's gaps. And the more they try to forget, the more it insists on returning. Like a loose thread no editor dared to cut. And maybe that's because they knew that, if pulled, the fabric of the story would start unraveling stitch by stitch, until only what no one had the courage to say remained. Have you ever felt there's something in the room that no one wants to look at directly? Like an object out of place, so uncomfortable that everyone pretends it's not there. David Payne is that object, a name that was at the center of the story from day one, and then suddenly evaporated. He was the closest friend of the couple, the last to see Madeleine alive besides her parents. He was at the dinner, part of the same group, sharing the same space, and yet almost nothing is said about him. No in-depth interviews, no real focus, no exposure like the others. But that absence speaks loudly. The silence around him is almost tangible. It's not just what he didn't say, it's what no one had the courage to ask, what was conveniently left aside. It's as if someone pulled the thread, and seeing what was coming, cut it before it unraveled everything. There's something about this stance that unsettles. Not the absence of guilt, but the absence of unease. While the McCanns faced the press, courts, books, and documentaries, Payne vanished into his own silence. A silence that doesn't feel like protection, it feels like armor. And that changes everything. Because if a narrative omits someone so close, so involved, so relevant, what else did it erase? Do you see? It's not just a loose thread. It's a line that might have stitched the entire tapestry together. And it was left out by choice, by fear, or by convenience. And when you find a line like that, the only question left is, who cut it? The absence of questions shapes as much as the answers do. And it's in that void, in the unsaid, that the gravest thing happens. Not the scandal, the forgetting. Imagine an entire case stitched together with versions, suspicions, and theories. And in the middle of it, a character who was there, involved, mentioned, simply vanishes. The few references to him fade from headlines. The media goes quiet, the authorities back off. The public doesn't question, but a woman saw something, a stray comment, a misplaced gesture, a lingering unease. And that unease was recorded, but never investigated with the weight it deserved. It was filed away like something awkward tucked into a drawer no one opens. The thread was there, but it was an ugly thread. It marred the fabric, wrinkled the discourse. So they hid it. And when they hide a thread, it's because it pulls more than it should. This is when the question becomes a wound. Was that silence earned or granted? Maybe it was easier to protect the fabric than to face what it could unravel. Maybe it was safer to keep the tapestry intact, even if it meant leaving questions unanswered. But now, the thread is visible, it stayed, and it can't be ignored anymore. You know, some silences scream, and when you truly listen, they're deafening. Because sometimes what no one says is exactly what matters most. It's strange, isn't it? How certain truths only hurt when they fall in silence. Some threads don't disappear. They can be ignored for a while, but they stay, thin, bothersome, cutting through the tapestry like a hasty stitch. David Payne's silence was never just a lack of words. It was an uncomfortable presence at the heart of a story that claimed it was enough that no one mentioned him anymore. Enough that when his name came up, someone changed the subject, shifted direction. Enough that the right question was never asked or never answered. And what that creates isn't just a gap in the investigation. It's a crack in the public's gaze. Because truth, when told in pieces, turns even what seems certain into doubt. In this case, silence became a kind of invisible frame. Everything we saw was with him, hidden in the corner. While the McCanns faced the world, headlines, interviews, accusations, trials, Payne stayed where he'd always been, in the background. And if that doesn't strike you as odd, maybe it's worth pausing to ask, why did he never have to defend himself from anything? This isn't about accusing without evidence. It's about understanding that not everything that matters lies in what was said. Sometimes what was left out screams the loudest. The doctor who reported the unease saw something, but the police didn't pull that thread to its end. The media saw his name fade and stayed silent too. The public, exhausted, moved on, like tripping over a stone, looking back and choosing to keep walking. But that stone stayed, that loose stitch stayed, and now it's here, visible, exposed. The question is no longer about what David Payne did or didn't do. It's about what was allowed to go unsaid. Because when a name fades that quickly, someone made it fade. Maybe because pulling that thread would unravel more than we're ready to face. Maybe because it would cost versions, careers, narratives. Maybe because it was more comfortable to leave that piece of the story unstitched. But you can't pretend it's not there anymore. So what do you do with this? You can look and move on, pretend you didn't see, say it doesn't matter, or you can embrace the discomfort, accept that the whole truth was never delivered. And that part of it might lie exactly in this loose thread you've now seen. This is where the weight of the narrative shifts. Because when someone notices a detail the rest of the world chose to ignore, that someone can't see the same way anymore. If you've made it this far, you're no longer a passive spectator. You've seen what was left aside. You've understood that Payne's silence isn't just his. It's ours too, as a society, as an audience, as people who accepted a half-told story. And now, what do you do with this thread? Maybe you pull it gently. Maybe you just look. Maybe you need time to process. That's okay. But once seen, it doesn't hide again. Some stories don't collapse with a bomb. They unravel in silence, stitch by stitch, when someone dares to pull the thread that was left. Some truths don't impose themselves with shouts. They whisper, they insinuate, and they hurt more because, amid all the noise, no one wanted to hear them. The loose thread tying David Payne to this story was never hard to see. It wasn't buried or hidden behind secret codes. It was there, in plain sight. But precisely because it was so visible, so uncomfortably close, it was stitched with silence, line by line, until it vanished from almost everyone's attention. But poorly sewn truth does this. It gives way over time, cracks at the edges, reveals what they tried to erase with neglect or convenience. And when you look again, calmly, without haste, without filters, what you see is more unsettling than any definitive answer. Because it's no longer about asking what he did or didn't do. The real question, the one that kept pounding in my head as I wrote this script, is, why didn't anyone want to know? His name didn't vanish by chance. It wasn't forgotten, it was sidelined. And in that gesture, in that carefully orchestrated forgetting, the official narrative reveals its weakest seam. What holds this fabric together might not be truth, but rather convenience. Knowing this changes everything. It changes how you see the case. It changes how you handle silence. It changes even the trust you had in what seemed resolved. Because when a story lets a name slip, it's not just hiding a character, it's protecting a structure. And maybe the scariest part is realizing that it wasn't just him who went silent. It was everyone around him. The media shifted focus. The police filed away the more uncomfortable statements. And we, as the public, accepted the final cut as if that thread had never existed. As if it was normal not to want to know. But now you can't pretend anymore. You've seen, you know? And that carries weight. Because after pulling this thread, even just a little, it's impossible to stitch the same version back together. The thread remains, in plain sight, on the edge, waiting for someone brave enough not to look away. And if this story hit you differently, if at any point you felt anger, doubt, suspicion, or that quiet urge to say, this isn't right, then maybe you're pulling this thread too. Even if you don't, you're not alone. And there's something I need to tell you, not as someone making a video, but as someone who's felt this unease for too long. When we choose to see what others don't want to, silence changes its sound. It becomes an answer. That's why this video isn't just content. It's a gesture, a way to say, I saw what you tried to leave out. And if you felt that with me, If this story cut through you at some unhealed point, leave a sign. Leave your gesture. It can be a line, a comment, a written silence, or a super chat. Because here, the super chat isn't just support, it's a symbolic response. A quiet reminder that you were here and that this moved you too. If this story stirred you, the super chat is your way of saying, keep going. It's like saying, I pulled the thread too, and now I can't pretend it's not there. It's not just a gesture, it's presence, it's belonging. It's one more thread being pulled this time from the other side. And if you want to continue this journey with me, if you want to feel what happens when we don't accept silence as an answer, the next video is ready, and it carries another wound. One the world tried to forget too quickly, but it still pulses, quietly, in those who had the courage to stay. Subscribe to the channel, because here we don't gloss over, we unravel. And now, tell me, what did this awaken in you? What was the point that hit you hardest? Write it in the comments. It can be just a line, but let it be real. I'll read every single one, because this story doesn't end with me. It continues in those who feel it. If you stayed until here, comment, I'm the thread no one cut. So I know you were here, fully, that you didn't turn away. And if you want to leave one more gesture, a thread pulled with force, you know where to do it. Not every silence is forgetting. And sometimes pulling a thread is what keeps the world from forgetting entirely. Thank you for staying until here and for seeing, even when no one else wanted to look.